Welcome to our garden on a bright sunny August morning, and I'm here to talk to you about gardening for biodiversity. Biodiversity is an unusual term, or it gets often misunderstood, but basically it means bio is biological or of nature, and diversity obviously is a variety. And when I'm thinking about gardening and my gardening methods that I use, I'm thinking about four main things really. So I'm thinking about the species. So are they native species, non-native species, and their value for wildlife? I'm thinking about the habitats that we have in our garden, the trees, the shrubs, the woodland, the grassland areas and the pond. I'm thinking about the essentials for life: water, food, shelter and safety. Safety from us, which I'll explain more about later. And finally, and probably the most unique thing in our thinking process, is that we're thinking about natural processes. So we're thinking about natural succession, we're thinking about grazing, thinking about self-seeding and natural decomposition within the garden. So how do we manage our garden for species? What criteria do we think of when we're thinking of species within our garden system? So fundamentally, we're focused on native species, and I've been working quite closely with Kew Gardens on their Grow Wild programme, so I'm promoting the growth of wildflowers, but we do grow exotic species as well. So from the point of view of species, we're thinking about what species can provide shelter for wildlife, trees and shrubs. Can they provide food, nectar, pollen, and plant sap and material, and can they provide the necessary requirements for particularly insects to complete their life cycles? So one key point I want to get across is that whilst most adult insects will feed on any plant that's accessible, any plant they can get nectar from, so single petal plants mainly are best for that, where they can get in and they can source the sugar that they require for their flights for feeding and stuff, and pollen for their protein. But the most important point is that considering with insects their life cycle and their life cycle process is their caterpillars and larvae. And one of the key points I would like to make is that a lot of butterfly and moth larvae require very specific species to feed. So when you're planning your garden, you need to think about that. And the best example I can give of that probably is the orange-tip butterfly. The orange-tip butterfly you'll probably see in your garden. It will feed on all sorts of plants for nectar, but the caterpillars only feed on garlic mustard. If you weed out garlic mustard out of your garden because you consider that wildflower a weed, then you are breaking the life cycle for that butterfly. So in our garden, we would actively encourage garlic mustard to survive and flourish so that the caterpillars have something to feed on. Habitats, scientific term, basically means home really for animals. So we're thinking about places where wild plants and animals can thrive, providing them the right conditions. And fundamentally in this garden we have a number of habitats that we manage for that are predominantly associated with woodland, but you will find them in other places. So starting up the top, if you like, the highest point, we have trees and shrubs that constitute the canopy and the subcanopy layer of a woodland. We have a number of exotic shrubs and smaller shrubs growing within the garden. We have a hedgerow, so it's an ancient hedgerow. It's the old parish and manorial boundary. It's got about 17 species, I think, within it of woody vegetation. We have grassland areas, and we manage grassland at a variety of different heights: tall grassland vegetation, medium and short grass, and then we have a pond. Fundamentally, managing those habitats, the most important aspect of that management is thinking about layers. And whether that is a grassland habitat, a woodland habitat, the variety of life stems from having those layers. So our habitat management is all about creating that variety or diversity, if you like, in physical structure, vertically and horizontally, and that provides more microhabitats for a greater variety of species. So also when we are managing our garden, we need to think about what I would call the four cornerstones of gardening for nature, which is water, food, shelter and safety. These are really important. You'll see them in a lot of the information you will find in books and guidance on wildlife gardening. But if we start with water, water obviously is essential. Water, all life on this planet thrives because of water. We are 90% water ourselves, so providing fresh water, clean unpolluted water is a really important aspect, and that can be through ponds and bird baths and various other features. Food's important as well, so we touched on this a bit and another aspect of this talk, but food from the perspective of nectar sources, pollen sources, but also fruit and nuts. So when we're planting trees and shrubs in the garden, we're picking species that are fruit and nut producers, both for ourselves because we eat some of it, but also for small mammals and birds and insects. Shelter is really important, so whether that's long grass, log piles, habitat piles, trees and shrubs, thorny trees and shrubs, deep hedgerow, for birds to nest, for small mammals to hide in and feel safe, amphibians and reptiles, really important. And finally, safety, and there's no simple way to sugarcoat this, but the safety is safety from us, safety from humans, because we're the biggest threat to wildlife. So it's about not using chemicals and being careful about what equipment. A really key aspect of our approach to managing this garden for biodiversity is about natural processes and understanding those natural processes and where they fit within nature and where they fit within our garden. So firstly, I suppose the most important one to touch on is natural succession, and that's the natural process of open ground developing vegetation cover plants, colonising and going through a natural process in the UK that finishes with closed canopy woodland, a woodland system, and that process will thrive anywhere, and it thrives in the garden. So it's about understanding that exists and allowing that to happen, but equally in a natural system there are things that would stop that or hold that process back, and fundamentally they're grazing animals, large grazing animals. So whilst we have rabbit and we have grasshoppers and slugs in the garden, we don't have any large grazing animals. So our role as gardeners is to replicate the impact of those grazing animals and resetting the clock, so that we turn back the clock and allow that natural process to continue. Another key one is self-seeding. We allow a lot of plants to self-seed. We cultivate with chaos, if you like. We allow plants to go to full period and allow their seeds to spread, and we need to create the conditions to allow those seeds to propagate. So whether that is clearing gravel garden areas to allow bare ground and disturbing the ground for annuals, or whether it's about scarifying lawn areas to create some bare soil for the perennial plants to drop their seed into to create a new generation. And the final process, the most important process, is natural decomposition, is allowing stuff to decompose, stay within a closed system of the garden, and to replenish the nutrients within that system. So until now we've been talking about gardening for biodiversity, and mainly focusing on the perspective from the point of view of nature and wildlife, the species, the habitats, the four cornerstones of gardening and natural processes. But of course, a garden being a garden, there's another aspect of that garden, and that's people. And where do people? And we manage our garden for wildlife and people. We provide rooms, little areas in the garden, seated areas where people can sit and reflect and relax. That's family members and friends. But also people have an important role as gardeners, and for us, Claire and I, managing this garden, we tend to think ourselves more of guardians than gardeners, and we are protecting and looking after an ark or a haven for wildlife. But it's more than that. We're stewards as well, so we are actually carrying out work. We're carrying out activities that promote our thoughts about biodiversity, and fundamentally we create conditions or set back the clock to create conditions that are suitable for wildlife. We create habitats that will attract wildlife. So whether that's clearing a grassland area at this time of year, whether that's coppicing or pollarding trees, or digging a hole in the ground to make a pond, all of that work is geared towards creating the right conditions, the right variety of conditions within the garden that will attract wildlife to our garden. And Fundamentally I see that as my role. If I can contribute something to biodiversity and to the well-being of the planet, that is my task, is to create those conditions, whether it's in our garden or elsewhere when I was managing nature reserves. That is the purpose. That should be what we all aspire towards, creating a place for nature alongside us.